Welcome to another iceberg. Today, in celebration for the release of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, I'll be taking a look at the Indiana Jones Iceberg. Now, I've already covered a few topics relating to Indiana Jones in previous videos, so if you're expecting me to talk about these topics in the video, I won't be. If you like the video, drop a like, maybe even throw in a comment, and subscribe, as I got plenty more icebergs on the way. And I've already got a ton made, like ones based on Marvel, DC, Godzilla, Alien and Predator, Transformers, alien and UFO sightings, etc. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive into the Indiana Jones Iceberg and see what we can find to put in a museum. That was really forced, I'm sorry, that sucked. Let's just get on with the video. Mutt Williams in the Bermuda Triangle film. After the release of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, rumors began to speculate online about what was next for the Indiana Jones franchise. George Lucas said in May of 2008 that perhaps Mutt Williams would be the protagonist of the fifth Indiana Jones film. Although, he would quickly change his mind on this. But that's all the internet needed for the rumor mill to start spinning. So, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, a rumor was making the rounds, stating that the fifth Indiana Jones film would star Shia LaBeouf as Mutt Williams, and he would be traveling into the Bermuda Triangle. Obviously, this never ended up happening, and nobody knows where the original rumor came from, but it was certainly a very popular rumor. How did Henry Jones Sr. die? When Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was released, many fans of the series questioned how Henry Jones Sr. could have died. After all, he drank from the Holy Grail. Surely he would be immortal. Right? Well, no. Honestly, it's kinda surprising how many people actually think this. It's pretty explicitly said in The Last Crusade that if you cross the seal, any side effects from drinking the Holy Grail will go away. Not only that, but it's also implied in the film that the only way to actually get immortality is to drink from the Holy Grail regularly. So yeah, Henry Jones Sr. was never immortal, but to answer the question, how did he die? I don't know, old age, I guess? Abner Ravenwood. Abner Ravenwood, Marion's father, is the Baggin of the Indiana Jones franchise. For those that don't know, Baggin is a kaiju that was intended to appear in around 10 or 11 different films, but was either cut from the films or the films that he was going to appear in were scrapped. And Abner Ravenwood has a pretty similar history. Originally, he was intended to show up in Indiana Jones 2, along with Marion. However, it was decided for Indy to have different love interests for every film, so both Ravenwoods were dropped from the film. It was then planned for Abner to appear in the Further Adventures of Indiana Jones comic series. However, besides a masked character that's hinted at being Abner, he never actually ends up appearing in the comic. Originally, Garth, or Fedora, or whatever you want to call him, was going to be Abner Ravenwood in early scripts for The Last Crusade. But this was changed as development went on. He was then supposed to appear in the Young Indiana Jones episode, Jerusalem, June 1909. But this episode was scrapped. More on that episode in a little bit. Abner was then supposed to appear in Indiana Jones and the Lost Horizon, which would have been a comic by Dark Horse Comics. However, this comic was cancelled. More on that project in a bit. Next, Ravenwood was meant to appear in The Emperor's Tomb as Indy's partner. However, he was cut from the game. Apparently, him following around Indiana Jones was actually making the game very complicated, so he was cut. And finally, on the official Indiana Jones website, it was announced that John Hurt would be playing Abner Ravenwood in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. However, this information was quickly removed. As it turns out, John Hurt was actually playing Oxley. To this day, it's unknown why the official website stated that he was playing Abner Ravenwood. Some fans have theorized that Oxley was originally going to be Abner Ravenwood, but as I'll talk about later, this isn't true. Scrapped LEGO Star Wars level. So most people know you could unlock Indiana Jones as a playable character in LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga by entering the bonus levels area and watching a trailer for the first LEGO Indiana Jones game. However, this wasn't the original way you would unlock Indiana Jones. Originally, you would be able to play a demo of the first level of LEGO Indiana Jones, The Lost Temple. The level would be condensed quite a bit. Halfway to the temple, the level would just skip to the boulder chase sequence, and that's where the level would end. The sections of the level involving Indy exploring the temple and Indy and Jock repairing the plane just didn't appear. This level would have not just unlocked Indiana Jones as a playable character, but also Satipo. This version of Satipo would have been very different from the LEGO Indiana Jones version of the character, as instead of a shovel, he has a revolver. Also, you can find a beta version of Jock in the game's files as well, and he also has a revolver. This level can be found in the files of the Nintendo Wii port of the Complete Saga. Also in the game's files, you can find a very early version of Indiana Jones's design, which, to be honest, looks better than the Complete Saga version of Indiana Jones. At least in my opinion. What happened to Short Round? Many fans of the Indiana Jones series have wondered what exactly happened to Short Round. After all, it seemed like he and Indy were pretty close, and he just disappears after Temple of Doom, not showing up in the last 3 films in the series. Not even being mentioned. So what happened? Well, there's the real-life explanation and the in-universe explanation. As for the in-universe explanation, Temple of Doom wasn't Short Round's only adventure with Dr. Jones. According to the Adventures of Indiana Jones RPG, after Temple of Doom, Short Round and Indy went to go rescue Willie, as she was kidnapped in Hong Kong. But because this is from a tabletop RPG, this might not actually be canon. However, there are 2 fully canon stories involving Short Round set after Temple of Doom. In Olympic Ordeal, a comic featured in the 5th issue of the Indiana Jones and the Lost Treasures magazine, Short Round and Indiana Jones travel to Greece in 1935 and discover some ancient coins. Short Round would then make a small appearance in issue 26 of the Further Adventures of Indiana Jones. In this story, he saves Indy from some pirates off the coast of Bimini. It's then revealed here that Short Round is attending a boarding school, and after this adventure, he goes back to that boarding school. And that's the last time Indy and Short Round ever went on an adventure together. Although, it wasn't the last time that Short Round went on an adventure. As revealed in the in-universe reference book, The Lost Journal of Indiana Jones, released in May of 2008, Short Round went on his own adventure in 1957, searching for the Peacock's Eye in Hawaii. So it seems that the in-universe explanation is that Indy probably wanted Short Round to grow up in a normal setting instead of traveling around the globe, risking death and watching Indy kill people. So he stopped adventuring with him. As for the out-of-universe explanation, it's because Short Round's actor actually quit acting in 2002. Meaning that he wasn't available for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and he probably didn't show up in The Last Crusade because that film was about Indy's relationship with his father. Having Short Round there would take attention away from this relationship. As for Dial of Destiny, he actually was considered for the film by director James Mangold, but he decided against bringing back Short Round because he couldn't find a place for the character to appear besides a cameo, and he didn't want to just bring back Short Round for a quick cameo. Short Round was also planned to appear in Indiana Jones 4 in the early 1990s, but all of the scripts involving him were scrapped. Why was the Grail Knight so old? Well, it's because the Grail Knight's actor, Robert Edinson, was in his late 70s when The Last Crusade was made. Okay, jokes aside, fans have been confused for quite a while about how the knight could be so old if he had the Holy Grail to drink from on the daily. Luckily, we actually do have an in-universe explanation as to why he's so old. As revealed in The Last Crusade's junior novelization, the knight did drink from the Grail every day in order to stay alive. However, living by yourself in a cave with literally nothing to do except for read a book for literal centuries usually leads you to question why you're even doing this in the first place. And that's what happened. Anytime the knight began to question his actions, he would physically age a year. So that's why the Grail Knight looks so old. Fortnite. In June of 2022, Indiana Jones was added into the game Fortnite. There were two different skins for him, the classic look and his appearance from the end of Temple of Doom. But it wasn't just character skins that were added into the game. Various cosmetic items inspired by Indiana Jones were also added into the game. For example, the Staff of Ra pickaxe and the inflatable raft parachute. But yeah, now you can have Indiana Jones Whip and Nene with Red Riot, Fennec Shand, Adam Eve, Captain Marvel, Daryl Dixon, Goku Black, Aquaman, LeBron James, Chespirito, Katara, and Splinter. Nuking the fridge. In Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Indiana Jones survives an atomic bomb by hiding in a lead-lined fridge. This short scene got a lot of people mad, and people to this day mock the scene for how crazy it is, with many people claiming that this scene was the jumping the shark moment for the franchise. Not the falling out of a plane in a raft scene from Temple of Doom, or this scene from Last Crusade, or the dude from Temple of Doom who gets his heart ripped out, or the ending of Raiders of the Lost Ark, or Indy meeting a dude who literally has been alive for centuries, or, well, you get the point. While this scene has been mocked relentlessly in media, I personally don't really have an issue with it. Yeah, it's silly, but there's a lot of silly things in the Indiana Jones series. Not saying you can't poke fun at it, obviously, but I will never understand how this scene got so many people angry. But yeah, since the release of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, nuking the fridge has become a very popular meme. And before somebody comments, yes, this scene did inspire Nuketown from Call of Duty. Deleted scenes. Unlike other film franchises I've covered, while we do know about a few deleted scenes from the Indiana Jones franchise, we can't actually watch most of them, as most of them have never actually been released. Because Steven Spielberg's weird about deleted scenes. Anyways, here's some deleted scenes from each of the 5 Indiana Jones films. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, originally, Marion would have kissed Indy in the bar in Nepal upon reuniting with him. Indy was originally going to have a full-on fight sequence with a Cairo swordsman. When Indy's riding on the German submarine, there was going to be a scene showing him riding the sub's periscope as the sub goes under the water. Originally, there was supposed to be a woman that Indy had a one-night stand with, just chilling in Indy's home when Marcus Brody visits him. Immediately after escaping the Well of Souls, Indy would have instantly knocked out a guard. And finally, while Indy and Marion are trapped in the Well of Souls, the German soldiers outside would decide to execute Sala. However, the soldier ordered to execute Sala would have second thoughts and decide not to kill him. As for Temple of Doom, originally, while riding the elephants to the palace, Indy, Short Round, and Willie would start singing. Originally, Indy would battle Chatar Lal on top of the sacrificial cage. During the fight, the cage would be lowered into the lava. While trying to save the kids, Indy would have built a bridge. After the kids escape over it, the bridge would catch fire, causing Indy, Short Round, and Willie to use the minecarts to escape. Originally, as Indy and the gang board Lao Che's plane, the plane's pilots would argue about how they should kill the trio. The sacrifice scene was going to be far more brutal. After getting his heart ripped out and dumped into the lava, the film would have shown the guy's face melting in the lava. And finally, there was supposed to be a scene where Willie tries to warn Chatar Lal about the cult, only for Lal to reveal that he's part of said cult, and captures her. As for The Last Crusade, originally, there was supposed to be an entire scene showing Indy and Marcus Brody's flight to Venice, where they would discuss Henry Jones Sr.'s diary. Originally, there was supposed to be a scene where Sala slaps a camel, causing the camel to spit at German soldiers. During the Zeppelin scene, Indiana Jones and his father would be shown trying to talk, as a German World War I flying ace is being really loud while telling stories of his time during the Great War. This would have led to the flying ace trying to chase after Indy and his dad as they escape the Zeppelin. He would hop into a second plane that was attached to the Zeppelin and instantly die, as he forgets to start the engine, causing the plane to free fall to the ground. After the tank battle, there was supposed to be a scene where Indy and the gang would discover the Grail Temple after seeing the Germans blowing up holes in the canyon housing the temple. Originally, there was supposed to be a fight scene between Indiana Jones and the Gestapo brute played by Pat Roach. While Pat Roach's character appears in the film, his fight scene was cut. And finally, there was supposed to be a scene where Sala would meet Indy and his father at a train station. As for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, during the fights at Area 51, Indy would use his whip to pull the trigger of a Russian soldier's AK. During the chase sequence across the college, there was supposed to be a scene where the Soviet spies would toss the statue of Marcus Brody's head to the ground. During the cemetery fight, Mutt would have actually used his switchblade to stab one of the warriors attacking him. He would do this by throwing the blade at him. At the end of the cemetery sequence, the floor of the crypt would have given, and revealed that the cemetery was built over a cliff looking over the Nazva Valley. While traveling with the captured Oxley, Spalko would tell Mac a story about the Soviet Psychic Powers program. She would then read Mac's mind, which would freak him out. And finally, while exploring the Crystal Skull Crypt, Indy and the gang would have originally encountered ancient motion sensor lights. And finally, as for Dial of Destiny, while traveling to Archimedes' tomb, Indy and Helena would have solved a puzzle involving a boulder being held up by a statue of Atlas. While chasing after Indiana Jones at the parade, Hawk was originally supposed to shove a bunch of sailors out of his way. And finally, the scene of Indy looking over the map right before sneaking away from the tour group was originally going to be a bit longer. Unfortunately, that's all of the deleted scenes we know about in Dial of Destiny. Aliens versus interdimensional beings. So Steven Spielberg was always hesitant on aliens appearing in the Indiana Jones franchise. as not only had he done multiple Alien films prior, but he also didn't want to introduce sci-fi elements into Indiana Jones. So why did Spielberg eventually cave in and let them appear in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? Well, it's because of George Lucas. Lucas really liked the idea of having aliens in an Indiana Jones film, so he convinced Spielberg to include them in the film. How did he do that? Well, he was able to convince Spielberg by saying that they weren't actually aliens, but instead interdimensional travelers. This somehow convinced Spielberg, and to this day, there isn't any official Indiana Jones media that refers to the aliens in Crystal Skull as aliens, instead referring to them as interdimensional beings. But like, they're aliens. Don't be a nerd about this. I know that's ironic coming from me, who makes a living off of talking about nerd stuff, but like, come on, they're aliens. It's not, come on. Temple of Doom injuries. During the filming of Temple of Doom, Harrison Ford herniated a disc while filming a scene of him riding an elephant. No, really. According to Harrison Ford, the scenes where Indy, Willie, and Short Round rode elephants took several days to film, and none of them were fans of it, with Harrison Ford stating, quote, "The only fun thing about riding elephants is the getting off." This constant riding of the elephants reactivated an old back injury he had, which caused him a massive amount of pain. However, he didn't want to hold up production, so he continued to film his scenes despite the severe pain. Obviously, this didn't last, as eventually he just couldn't work anymore, and was flown out to Los Angeles for surgery. But filming on Temple of Doom didn't stop, and many of the fight scenes were filmed while Harrison Ford was away, with his stunt double, Vic Armstrong, filming these scenes. Harrison Ford would return to set 6 weeks later and filmed the rest of his scenes. But Harrison Ford wasn't the only one who got injured on set. During the filming of the minecart chase, Ke-Huy Quan, Short Round's actor, accidentally hit Kate Capshaw, Willie Scott's actress, in the eye. This resulted in her getting a black eye. Indiana Jones has met like a million historical figures. So over the course of his life, Indiana Jones has met a couple of historical figures, like Al Capone, Mustache Man, E.M. Forster, Howard Carter, Theodore Roosevelt, Pablo Picasso, Winston Churchill, Ernest Hemingway, George S. Patton, the Red Baron, Charles Mangan, Amelia Earhart, Archimedes, Lawrence of Arabia, Sigmund Freud, Anthony Fokker, Sidney Bechet, Mustafa Kemal, Pancho Villa, Frederick Selous, Charles de Gaulle, and many, many more. Most of these historical figures were seen in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, as George Lucas had created the show with the intention of it being educational, teaching the people watching it about various historical figures as Indiana Jones meets them. Indiana Jones and the Saucer Men from Mars. In September of 1993, Jeb Stuart and George Lucas worked together to create a script for the fourth Indiana Jones film, titled Indiana Jones and the Saucer Men from Mars. Although Jeb Stuart would eventually leave the project and was replaced with Jeffrey Boehm in 1995. As for the film's plot, the film would be set in 1949. After battling some pirates using a World War II German U-boat in Borneo, Indiana Jones and his latest lover, Dr. Elaine McGregor, are about to get married. However, at their wedding, he gets stood up as she bails, leaving in a car with a mysterious man named Bob Bolander. Indy's pretty confused by all of this, and decides to investigate, traveling to the White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico, where he's captured by the US government, but is then brought in by them to work on a top-secret project along with Elaine. They want his help with investigating a crashed UFO, which contained not just dead aliens, but also ancient codes written in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Indy is able to crack the aliens' code and discovers that the aliens were trying to travel to Mount Kibo. Elaine is then captured by Soviet spies, and so a car chase occurs, as Indy chases after the Russians through a military base, though during this chase, Indy gets blasted off in a rocket sled, where he ends up in a nuclear testing area that looks like a normal town, requiring him to use a lead-lined fridge to save his life from the nuclear fire. Eventually, Indy and Elaine would get on a plane and head to Mount Kibo. But while traveling to the mountain, the plane they're on is revealed to be full of Soviet spies who battle Indy and Elaine. But as they're fighting in the plane, a UFO arrives and takes control of the plane. Indy and Elaine then escape from the plane and parachute into an abandoned town, where they meet a bunch of 7-foot-tall spider-like aliens that aren't actually aliens. They're robots created by bug-like aliens. The UFO from before returns, and the aliens confront the pair. It's then revealed here that the cylinders that contains the Egyptian hieroglyphics are actually some kind of weapon. The UFO was then destroyed by the US Army, led by Bolander, which leads to Bolander taking the cylinder and heading off to Mount Kibo. Then another UFO shows up, this time an enormous mothership. This UFO begins devastating the US Army. Bolander then takes the cylinder and brings it to the top of the mountain, hoping that the power coming from the cylinder will be enough to destroy the mothership. However, this doesn't happen, and Bolander is blown apart by the mothership, who then take the cylinder and fly off back into space. After this adventure, Indy and Elaine finally get married and the film ends. This film is notable for two things. The first is that both wedding scenes would feature a variety of cameos from characters from previous films, like Marion, Sala, Henry Jones Sr., Short Round, and Willie. And the second notable thing is that the film completely abandons two things that make the Indiana Jones franchise Indiana Jones: the globe-trotting adventuring and archaeology. Yeah, there's some Egyptian hieroglyphics, and Indy would have discovered some kind of idol at the beginning of the film in Borneo, but that's pretty much it. And as for the globe-trotting, the only places that Indy would travel to in the film are Borneo, New Mexico, and Maine. So why didn't this film end up happening? Well, besides Spielberg's lack of an interest in Indiana Jones meeting aliens, the film Independence Day pretty much killed the film, as apparently, after seeing the film, Spielberg felt that Saucermen from Mars just couldn't compete with it. Indiana Jones is a World War I veteran, so most people know that Indy is a veteran of the Second World War. After all, we literally see him fighting in World War II in Dial of Destiny. However, this isn't the first World War that he's fought in. As revealed in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, Indy is a veteran of World War I. Indy joined up with the Belgian army and fought in several battles during the war, including the Battle of the Somme, which, according to Wikipedia, did not include the Belgian military. In fact, the unit that Indy was a part of, the 9th Belgian Infantry, wasn't actually a real division until World War II. And this was supposed to be an educational show? Shame on you, George Lucas. This is a joke, by the way. People get really weird about George Lucas and really defensive, so, like, I need to ruin the joke by clarifying that this is a joke. Anyways, the 9th Belgian Infantry would get absolutely annihilated during a fight, so Indy and a few survivors were then absorbed into the French military. Can militaries do that? Just, like, absorb soldiers from other militaries into their own? Whatever. Indy fought in the rest of World War I as part of the French military and the Belgian military, participating in the Battle of Verdun, working with Lawrence of Arabia, acting as a reconnaissance agent in the skies over the war, and killing Dracula. More on that later. And after the war came to a close, Indy would attend the Paris Peace Conference and move back to America. Also, because I know some people are going to comment about it, the 2 world wars weren't the only armed conflicts that Indy took part in. He also took part in the Mexican Revolution and was present during the Easter Rebellion. Temple of Doom racism controversy. For a while, Temple of Doom was the most controversial Indiana Jones film, not only because of its dark tone, but also because many have accused the film of being racist, to the point where Temple of Doom was briefly banned in India. When people say Temple of Doom is racist, they usually point at 4 different parts of the film as evidence for the film's racism. The first being the blackface, which, yeah, this was really bad. You can't even go like, oh, it was just a product of the times. No, this film wasn't made in the 1910s. This was the 80s. Everyone knew this was bad at the time. And before somebody brings up Tropic Thunder or It's Always Sunny, the joke in those is that blackface is bad. Whereas in Temple of Doom, it's just blackface. Like, there's no joke to it, it's just blackface. The second is the fact that Indiana Jones, a white guy, is the one who saves the Indian village and the children enslaved by the cult. People claim that this is Indy being a white savior. Then there's the infamous dinner scene, which shows a bunch of Indian people eating baby snakes, beetles, monkey brains, and eyeball soup. While many people claim that this is racist, other people have claimed that this was actually a joke, but not intended to be at the expense of Indian people. People argue that this scene was actually just to show that the cult is weird, not all Indian people, just the cult, and that somehow this joke either went over most people's heads, or the joke wasn't done correctly, so it came off as racist. And finally, people have claimed the film attempts to justify the British occupation of India from 1858 to 1947, as Captain Blumbert in the film expresses that Britain should rule over India. This is backed by a scene at the end of the film where he leads a team of soldiers to save Indy and the gang from the cult, with some people arguing that this scene is meant to show, quote, civilized British people saving Indy from the savage Indian people, while others argue that this is simply just how British soldiers acted during the 1930s. They were just portraying him realistically. What do you guys think? Is Temple of Doom racist? Leave your thoughts below, and please be civil. 93-year-old Indiana Jones. Each episode of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles ends with an epilogue set in 1992, where Indy is shown living on Staten Island at the age of 93. Marion's not around, so I guess she's dead. These scenes have Indy played by George Hall, and might not actually be canon. It's weird. Indy is shown having a daughter named Sophia and grandchildren named Spike and Lucy in these sections of the show. But it's also mentioned in these sections that Indy has multiple kids who are still alive. So where did they all come from? Obviously, since these scenes were filmed in the 1990s, Mutt Williams wasn't a character even thought up yet. But now that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny are out, we're left with some weird questions. For example, is Sophie Marion's daughter? Because that would mean that Indy and Marion had another kid in the late 1960s, which I don't think they did. It's also been speculated that Indy might actually be in a Joseph Joestar kind of situation, as Indy has had many different romantic partners over the course of his life. So there's a decent chance that he bailed before he found out that he got one of them pregnant. This is the explanation that most fans believe. But here's the thing. George Lucas really doesn't like these segments of the show. So when the young Indiana Jones Chronicles were turned into TV movies, all of these scenes were removed, meaning that the only way to see these scenes is to watch the original episodes. But that's kind of hard, because George Lucas has made it so that only the TV movie versions of the episodes have ever been released on VHS, DVD, and streaming in North America and Europe. In fact, the only home release of these episodes to be released were Laserdiscs and VHS tapes released exclusively in Japan. So at least according to George Lucas, these scenes aren't really canon. So, are they canon? No idea. Indiana Jones continuity is very weird, but I like to think that they're canon. Mystery of the Blues. Indiana Jones was played by 4 different actors throughout the young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Corey Carrier for when we see Indy when he's a kid, Sean Patrick Flannery when he's a teenager and a young adult, and George Hall when we see Indy in his 90s. The final actor to play Indy in the show was none other than Harrison Ford. Yup, for a single episode from Season 2, The Mystery of the Blues, Harrison Ford reprised his role as Indy. In fact, this episode, which aired in March of 1993, was actually the last time Harrison Ford played the character until Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in 2008. Sadly, he's not really in most of the episode. He only shows up for roughly 8 minutes. Set in 1950, Indy and his friend Grey Cloud have a brief scuffle with some criminals who are attempting to steal a sacred Native American peace pipe. And Indy's able to defeat these goons with the power of a saxophone he finds lying on the ground, playing a high note, causing some snow to collapse on the attempted thieves. All of Harrison Ford's scenes were filmed while Harrison Ford was filming the movie The Fugitive, which required him to have a beard, so they couldn't shave it off for this episode. If this episode was made nowadays, they'd probably just CGI the beard off, and it would probably look just as bad as Superman in Justice League. Indiana Jones and the City of the Gods. In May of 2002, Frank Darabont was brought in to write the 4th Indiana Jones film, titled Indiana Jones and the City of the Gods. The film would open up in the late 1950s, as Indy is betrayed by his Russian friend named Yuri while working in Nevada. Turns out, his friend Yuri is a Soviet spy and is trying to buy uranium and a mysterious package from some treasonous American scientists. Indy tries to stop Yuri and his merry gang of Soviet spies, but he's beaten and left to die in a fake town built for nuclear testing. Indy then uses a lead-lined fridge to survive a nuclear blast. He's then found by the US government, who suspect him of being a communist sympathizer. This leads to Indy losing his teaching job. In the aftermath of losing his job, Indiana Jones gets drunk and breaks into the Marcus Brody Museum, stealing various items that he had once donated to the museum, such as the idol from the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Indy's then arrested by the FBI, but then the FBI agents arresting him are killed by a Soviet spy, who then tries to kill Indy. Indy kills the spy and discovers a key to a locker in New York City. He travels to New York City and discovers a crystal skull stashed in a locker along with instructions to meet someone at a hotel. Indy then travels to the hotel and is given plane tickets to Peru. Indy leaves to Peru and reunites with Marion, who's now a Hungarian noble, as she's married to a nobleman and archaeologist named Peter Belasco. She explains to Indy that the crystal skull is needed to locate a mythical city in the Amazon that their old friend Oxley went missing trying to find. Indy and Marion try to locate the city, but are attacked by Yuri, only to then be rescued by a man named Felix von Graun, a German man living amongst the Jovitos tribe, the tribe from the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Felix, Indy, and Marion then travel to Marion's husband's campsite, where it's revealed that Yuri is now working with a Peruvian dictator named Escalante. Indy and Marion then discover Oxley, who's being held captive in a cage, being used by Marion's husband to decipher symbols in order to locate the city. Soviet soldiers then arrive, and a three-way fight ensues between Indy, the Soviets, and the Peruvian military. But the fight is interrupted by an army of fire ants that absolutely annihilate most of the soldiers. Oxley escapes the situation by swinging around on some tree vines. Indy, Marion, and Belasco are then captured by the Peruvian military, but Belasco is able to kill them and reveals to Marion that he's actually a Soviet agent. Indy, Marion, Felix, Escalante, and Oxley are all captured by the Soviets and accompany the remaining Soviets to the lost city known as Lost Diosis. In the city, they discover various objects belonging to cultures from across the globe, along with 13 alien mummies. An alien mummy then communicates with the group, telling them the story about how he and his alien friends are the reason why Earth has any kind of civilization and religion. As a reward for returning one of the mummy's heads, the alien decides to grant a single wish from each person there. Felix... him. It turns out that Felix is actually a former German soldier from World War II, so he's a bad guy. Anyways, Felix wishes for the Axis power's greatness to come back. So the alien creates a fake mustache man who then rips out Felix's heart. Escalante wishes to be feared by everyone, so he's turned into a poison dart frog. Belasco wants to know everything, so he's given all of the information in the universe, but this melts his brain. Indy, seeing all of this, wishes for Marion, and the alien is just like, okay, I guess I can't really troll you. So he moves on to Oxley and tries to absorb Oxley. Turns out, the alien is only granting the wishes so that he could absorb all of their souls in order for him to be revived. Watching Oxley get absorbed, Indy says, screw it, and decides to kill the alien with a gun, saving Oxley's life. Indy, Marion, Oxley, and Yuri all escape the city, and a giant UFO emerges from the city and tries to take off into space, but crashes into the Amazon, creating a nuclear-like explosion. Yuri is then beaten by Indy, who tells Yuri to stay away from the United States. Indy and Marion then travel back to Washington, D.C. and get married. Oh, and Henry Jones Sr. and Sala show up for a cameo at the end of the film. And that's how the film ends. So why didn't this film happen? Well, it technically did happen. As you can probably tell, City of the Gods would eventually evolve into Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but as of this version of the film, while both Spielberg and Darabont liked the film, George Lucas wasn't really a fan of the script, so he decided to rewrite the film, giving the film the new title, Indiana Jones and the Phantom City of the Gods. Although this script was eventually rewritten as well, eventually resulting in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles will continue in a moment.
Look! Here it is.
I wonder what it means.
Means man, bird, sunrise, monkey. My daughter drew him.
You got something in your teeth.
Indiana Jones was on the Titanic. It turns out that zombies and talking dogs weren't the only strange passengers on board the ocean liner, the Titanic, when it sunk. It turns out, so was Indiana Jones. Young Indiana Jones and the Titanic Adventure, written by Les Martin and released in September of 1993, is a novel set on the Titanic as it sinks into the Atlantic Ocean. While on the ship, a very young Indiana Jones discovers some German terrorists planning on blowing up the Titanic, so he's gotta stop them. Except, not really. He tells some people about the conspiracy to destroy the Titanic, and then he spies on a dude he believes is the mastermind behind the conspiracy. But it turns out that that guy wasn't actually part of the conspiracy. A different guy was. Regardless, the Titanic is sunk. Although it is left ambiguous whether or not the plan to sink the Titanic was actually the reason why it sunk. But yeah, anyways, Indiana Jones was on the Titanic and survived. And a month later, his mom died. Sala and Henry Jones Sr. in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Originally, both Sala and Henry Jones Sr. were meant to appear in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Sala was meant to have a cameo appearance at the end of the film, at Indy and Marion's wedding. However, this didn't end up happening because Sala's actor, John Rhys Davies, declined the offer to return, as he didn't want to do just a cameo, saying in an interview, quote, "They did offer to bring a camera crew to me in order to film a bit of blue screen where you would have seen me clapping for the happy couple. But that's all it would have been. I don't know. I suppose I felt as though it would have cheated the audience just a little bit. I like to think that the audience has some fondness for Sala, and just to give him an appearance as brief as all that, a quick cutaway, well, that's sort of short-selling him, isn't it?" As for Henry Jones Sr., originally, he was also supposed to appear for a cameo at the wedding. However, when the offer was given to Sean Connery, he declined. Not because he wasn't interested in reprising the role, but because, one, he didn't really like the idea of just filming a cameo, and two, he thought retirement was just too much fun. Henry Jones Sr. wanted to become the next Grail Knight. As revealed in the comic miniseries Indiana Jones and the Spear of Destiny, released from April to July of 1995, and written by Elaine Lee, at the end of The Last Crusade, Henry Jones Sr. really wanted to stay behind and take over the position of the Grail Knight. This is, despite the Holy Grail falling through a crack in the earth, so it's no longer at the temple. However, that wasn't the reason why he didn't stay behind. Instead, he didn't stay behind and become the next Grail Knight because he thought that he was too weak and unworthy to guard the Holy Grail. This entry might not actually be Iceberg worthy, but I found it kinda weird that Henry Jones Sr. straight up wanted to abandon his son that he just reconnected with in order to guard the Holy Grail. Dial of Destiny injuries. In June of 2021, during the filming of Dial of Destiny, Harrison Ford tore the muscle off of his shoulder while rehearsing a punch for the train sequence at the beginning of the film. Harrison Ford left production for 8 weeks following the injury in order to recover. In response to this incident, Harrison Ford stated in an interview, quote, "I'm also known for shutting movies down because I get hurt, which is not something you want to be known for. But hey, shit happens." But it wasn't just Harrison Ford who got injured while working on the film. Oliver Richters, who played Hawk in the film, actually broke his leg while filming the New York chase sequence, slipping on some confetti. And this happened very early on in production, so throughout the rest of his scenes, Oliver Richters had to act with a broken leg. This injury is actually the reason why that scene involving Hawk shoving a bunch of sailors was cut, as with this injury, he couldn't exactly run. Original casting. Like with all films and shows, the actors we see in the Indiana Jones films weren't usually the first choice or had tough competition in the casting phase of development. So here's a list of actors who were either considered for, auditioned for, or declined roles in the Indiana Jones franchise. As for Indiana Jones, Jack Nicholson, Sam Neill, David Hasselhoff, Bill Murray, Mark Harmon, Tom Selleck, Peter Coyote, Barry Bostwick, Harry Hamlin, Tim Matheson, and John Shea were considered for the role. As for Marion Ravenwood, Amy Irving, Sean Young, Deborah Winger, and Barbara Hershey were considered for the role. For Henry Jones Sr., Christopher Plummer, Gregory Peck, and John Pertwee were considered for the role. As for Sala, Danny DeVito and Kevork Malikian were considered for the role. As for Irina Spalko, Virginia Madison was considered for the role. As for Belloc, Jonathan Pryce and Giancarlo Giannini was considered for the role. As for Willie Scott, Sharon Stone was considered for the role. As for Elsa Schneider, Amanda Redman was considered for the role. As for Tote, Roman Polanski, Klaus Kinski, and Michael Schurd were considered for the role. As for Colonel Vogel, Julian Clover was considered for the role. And finally, as for the Grail Knight, Lawrence Oliver was considered for the role. Helmut von Mephisto. Helmut von Mephisto is the main antagonist of the novel Indiana Jones and the Mystery of Mount Sinai, released in May of 2009. He wouldn't be all that interesting if it wasn't for the fact that he's a cyborg. As you can tell from the cover of the book, Mephisto was a man with a robotic right arm that could fire out electricity. Sent by Germany to investigate Indiana Jones in 1941, he eventually decides to find Mount Sinai in order to take over the world with weaponry located inside of the mountain. And upon finding the mountain, he and the soldiers under his command are attacked by living rock monsters guarding the mountain. Eventually, Mephisto is crushed nearly to death by a rock monster. He's left for dead in the mountain as the mountain fires off an obelisk into space. And he never is shown dying, but he's never shown surviving either. Although since he never returns, it's safe to assume that he died there due to his injuries. Honestly, there's not really much more I can say about this guy, because he's just kind of your standard Indiana Jones villain, except for the fact that he has a robotic arm that fires off electricity, and nearly got crushed to death by a rock monster. Although he was created for the 2009 novel, his origins actually date back decades. But I'll talk about that a bit later, because it involves a scrapped Indiana Jones film. Indiana Jones Adventure World. Indiana Jones Adventure World is a Facebook video game released in October of 2011 about Indiana Jones working with various new adventurers traveling the globe doing whatever. Interestingly, this game wasn't originally an Indiana Jones game. Just 1 month prior, in September 2011, the game was released as Adventure World and had no connection to the Indiana Jones IP. Anyways, back to the game. Indiana Jones Adventure World allowed players to travel the globe in 1934 and explore ancient sites while looking for treasure while battling thieves, pirates, and even monsters occasionally. Players played as members of the Adventure Society, a group of adventurers that travel the globe looking for artifacts. Kind of like the Super Adventure Club, just, minus the, well, you know. Anyways, the Adventure Society works with a bunch of Indiana Jones characters, including Indiana Jones, Marcus Brody, Oxley, Sala, and Marion. You meet all these characters as you progress through the game's various stories, and oh boy, there is a lot of stories. Some stories include helping Sala locate Crocodilopolis, rescuing Marcus Brody from the Bermuda Triangle, beating Belloc to the scales of Osiris, battling an army of mummies in Cairo with Indy and Sala, and working with Marion to find the lost city of Shangri-La and destroy the entrance to it. Now, you're probably wondering, is this game canon? No, probably not, especially since the game directly contradicts the events of the video game Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb and the novel Indiana Jones and the Secrets of the Sphinx. Sadly for fans of the game, in late 2012, Zynga, the company that developed the game, shut the game down as part of a cost-cutting measure, leaving various stories in the game that were still being worked on incomplete. Young Indiana Jones at the World's Fair. Young Indiana Jones at the World's Fair is a cancelled video game from the 1990s that would have been developed by Lucas Learning. Apparently the game wasn't very popular at LucasArts, as former LucasArts employees have mentioned that a lot of people at LucasArts didn't really like the game. As to what the game was going to be about, it was going to be an educational game that would have had Indiana Jones being somehow involved in the creation of machine gun synchronization gear for World War I biplanes, and the story would have taken place at the World's Fair. If I had to guess, it would probably take place at either the 1910's Brussels World Fair or the 1913 Ghent World's Fair. Anyways, as to why the game was cancelled, it was simply because the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles was cancelled. So LucasArts didn't really think that it was all that important to continue production on the game. Indiana Jones dated a 15-year-old. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's mentioned that Indy dated Marion 10 years prior to the events of the film, with Marion referring to herself as a child. And in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Marion's 25 years old, and Indy is 37, which means that 10 years prior to the events of the film, Marion was 15 and he was 27, meaning that a 27-year-old Indiana Jones dated a teenager. Yeah, not great. Some have argued that this was done to show that Indy wasn't exactly the nicest dude around, but honestly, even if that was the original intention, there's better and less creepy ways of portraying that. And if this was the intention, Spielberg and Lucas quickly changed their minds about Indy being a bad dude as the series went on. So yeah, Indiana Jones has committed, well, a phrase that I cannot say on YouTube. But wait, it gets so much worse. In 1978, while planning out the film, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Lawrence Kasdan came together and brainstormed ideas for the film. And thanks to a transcript of this meeting, we know that George Lucas wanted Marion to be 11 or 12 when Indy dated her, and Spielberg wanted the 12-year-old Marion to be the one that starts the relationship. Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones 5. Originally, Steven Spielberg was going to direct Indiana Jones 5. However, he left the project in February of 2020. He left Indiana Jones 5 because he wanted to work on other projects, probably getting tired of the development hell Indiana Jones 5 was in. Now, a lot of people assume that Dial of Destiny was the film that Spielberg was going to make back when he was going to direct the film. However, that's not true. We don't know exactly what his version of Indiana Jones 5 is going to be, but it wasn't going to be Dial of Destiny, as David Cope was the one writing the film. In fact, he wrote 2 different scripts for Indy 5. However, neither script was approved, as there was heavy disagreement between Steven Spielberg, Harrison Ford, and Disney regarding Cope's scripts. After Spielberg left the project, Cope followed shortly afterwards, and so new writers were brought on board to write the film. One of the very few things that we know about Steven Spielberg's Indy 5 was that the film's MacGuffin would have been different than the Archimedes dial, as James Mangold was the one who came up with the idea to use the Archimedes dial as the film's MacGuffin. And since it was reported that the film's MacGuffin was thought up by Steven Spielberg back in 2016, this means that the film had to have had a different artifact. The last thing I want to mention is that Cope actually received writing credits for Dial of Destiny, so it's possible that the film that we got used elements that were going to be used in Steven Spielberg's Indy 5. Berlin, late August 1916. This is a scrapped episode of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Written by Gavin Scott, this episode would follow the episode Germany, mid-August 1916, and focus on Indy arriving in Berlin after escaping a German POW camp. He's able to get to Berlin by lying about being a double agent. However, once he gets to Berlin, he tries to escape the city, only to be caught and nearly be beaten to death. He's found and nursed back to health by Sigrid Schultz, who tells him that he can escape Berlin by contacting the American embassy. However, Indy refuses because this would mean abandoning his fellow soldiers on the front lines of World War I. So he decides to return to the war. And this episode would end with an epilogue featuring elderly Indiana Jones telling the story in court. Why is he in court? Well, in the last episode, Indiana Jones attacked a dude at a donut shop for just being rude. Who was the Grail Knight? Despite being the literal guardian of the Holy Grail, to this day, the Grail Knight's real name has never been revealed. But that doesn't mean that fans haven't theorized about his name. For starters, many fans believe that the Grail Knight is William the Lion, a real-life king that ruled Scotland from 1165 to 1214. These fans believe that he's the Grail Knight because in an earlier draft of The Last Crusade, made by Jeffrey Boehm, the Grail Knight literally says that's his name. However, because this version of the film was scrapped, it's more than likely not canon. That leads us to the second and much more popular theory that the Grail Knight is actually Sir Percival, a member of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. However, this is probably not true either, because Sir Percival comes from King Arthur mythology, and the Grail Knight mentions that he was part of the First Crusade, which occurred from 1096 to 1099, much later than when the King Arthur story takes place. So, who is the Grail Knight? Well, sadly, I don't really have an answer for you. The Grail Knight's identity is still a mystery, and probably will always be a mystery. The Sentinel. The Sentinel is a cancelled issue of the Further Adventures of Indiana Jones comic series being released by Marvel in the early 1980s. The story was being written by John Byrne, and The Sentinel would have been the third issue in the series. However, Byrne left the series after working on the first two issues, because Marvel wanted the Sentinel to be the first issue of the series, instead of the actual first issue, which was already completed. Basically, they wanted Bryan to rush out the issue, and Bryan wasn't about to do that. So he left. And when he left, the story was cancelled. The only thing we know about this story is that it would have involved Indy looking for the head of Pelup Tichanku, which would have been guarded by a man who was over 2,000 years old. Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix. Releasing from December of 1994 to March of 1995, Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix is a comic miniseries written by Lee Mars, and is not what I'm talking about. Well, not really, but kinda. Instead of the comic, I'm talking about the cancelled video game the comic is an adaptation of. The Iron Phoenix began development in 1993 under the name Indiana Jones and the Philosopher's Stone, no relation to the novel of the same name. The game was going to be a sequel to Fates of Atlantis, and would have had an animation style similar to Batman the Animated Series. The game's early development was a bit of a mess, with the game's story changing as people left and joined the project. One of the original ideas for the game came from Hal Barwood and Joe Pinney, who wanted the game to take place in 1947 with Indiana Jones facing off against the Soviet Union in order to locate the Philosopher's Stone. Both parties would end up in South America for the finale. However, Joe Pinney would leave the project, so the story was changed to include the remnants of the Third Reich attempting to return to power by resurrecting Mustache Man. And this is actually what killed the game. 15 months into the game's development, the team at LucasArts working on the game found out that Germany had made it illegal for any piece of media to depict the Third Reich being revived. Depictions of the Third Reich were also heavily restricted there, banning all images of the swastika unless they were used in educational material about World War II or were in movies. LucasArts already knew about the latter part, as they had swapped out swastikas for iron crosses in Fate of Atlantis. However, they didn't know about the whole if you have a story about the Third Reich being revived, you can't sell your game in Germany. So LucasArts canceled the game because the game's plot was centered around that very idea, so they couldn't exactly censor it. Thankfully, we know most of the game's story, as the comic series I mentioned prior was made. Although, only 3 out of the 4 issues were actually based on the game. So the final issue of the comic is actually completely original. The last thing I want to mention is that the idea of using live-action cutscenes was being tossed around at the time of the game's development. George Lucas was even thinking about asking Harrison Ford to reprise the role of Indiana Jones for these cutscenes. However, after actually seeing the quality of live-action cutscenes in the mid-1990s, George Lucas decided it wasn't worth asking Harrison Ford back. DVD video games. The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, Special Delivery, Revolution, and Hunting for Treasure are 3 educational video games developed by LucasArts and released over a decade after the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles was cancelled. These games were released as part of the DVD release of the series, with Special Delivery being on Disc 9 of Volume 2, Hunting for Treasure on Disc 10 of Volume 3, and Revolution on Disc 12 of Volume 1. Releasing from 2007 to 2008, these DVD point-and-click games retell events from the TV series, with Special Delivery adapting the episodes German East Africa, December 1916, and Congo, January of 1917. Hunting for Treasure adapting the Treasure of the Peacock's Eye, and Revolution adapting Princeton, February of 1916, and The Curse of the Jackal. These games use a mix of animated cutscenes and footage from the actual show to tell the game's story, and focuses primarily on Indy answering trivia questions and doing puzzles. But while that doesn't really sound super exciting, Indy can actually die in the game. For example, in Revolution, Indy can die of dehydration if you gamble your water away while playing blackjack. There's even several shooting sections in each of the games. While adaptations of episodes from the show, these games often have continuity errors. For example, in Revolution, Indy's diary says the year is 1911, when the game actually takes place in 1916. A similar thing happens in Hunting for Treasure, as Indy's diary states the year is 1916, when in reality it's 1918. Also, as you've probably noticed, Indy's blonde in all of these games. Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye. Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye was the original name of the Indiana Jones dark ride at Disneyland in California. However, that's not actually what I'm talking about. It was decided to promote the ride at Super Bowl 29 in January of 1995. But instead of doing a commercial like any other company would, Disney decided to produce a 12-minute long stage show that served as Super Bowl 29's halftime show. The halftime show, named Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye, tells the story of Indiana Jones and Marion parachuting into the Temple of the Forbidden Eye to recover the Vince Lombardi trophy. The duo enter the temple and take the trophy. After securing the trophy, they travel to Club Disney to celebrate. However, the Guardians of the Temple of the Forbidden Eye track them down and attack the club, capturing the trophy and Marion. Indy returns to the temple and saves both Marion and the trophy, promising to give the trophy to whoever wins the Super Bowl. Also, Patti LaBelle, Tony Bennett, and Arturo Sandoval show up to sing a few songs. This halftime show was not received very well, and is often forgotten about. Indiana Jones and the Lost Horizon. This is a cancelled Indiana Jones comic that was going to be written by Pete Ford and Hugh Fleming. The comic would have been released in the mid-1990s and be published by Dark Horse Comics. The story would have seen Indiana Jones and Abner Ravenwood traveling to Tibet in 1926 to steal the headpiece to the Staff of Ra from a Chinese warlord's treasure room. The story would have also seen Indy confronting Belloc on top of a skyscraper in New York City over a fake Shroud of Turin, and Marion would have shown up in the comic as well. The only other thing we know about the story is that it would have explained Indy's inconsistent beliefs on the supernatural between Temple of Doom and Raiders of the Lost Ark. The story was going to reveal that Abner told Indy to always be skeptical of what you see, and to not tell anyone about what you've seen because people will think you're crazy. Sadly, this story was cancelled due to low sales of the previous Dark Horse Comics Indiana Jones comics. Indiana Jones' first wife. So most people don't know this, but Marion wasn't Indiana Jones' first wife. Enter Deirdre Campbell Jones. First appearing in the novel Indiana Jones and the Dance of the Giants, written by Rob McGregor and released in June of 1991, Deirdre went on an adventure with Indiana Jones in 1925. This adventure led to the pair discovering that Deirdre had a secret half-brother who was not only a member of the British Parliament, but also a high-ranking member of a Druidic cult, the Order of the Hyperboreans. Bro died by the end of the story, though. Discovering that she had a half-brother, only to have him die shortly afterwards, was apparently a very romantic experience, as Indy and Deirdre got married shortly after this adventure in March of 1926. However, the pair was only married for a few weeks, as shortly after the wedding, the pair were in a plane crash that killed Deirdre and everyone else on board except for Indy. This obviously messed Indy up for a while, giving him survivor's guilt that resulted in nightmares for years after. It was so traumatic that Indy just flat out pretended that he had never been married. Now you're probably wondering, how come Deirdre isn't brought up more? After all, she's Indy's first wife, and her death was seemingly a pretty impactful moment for Indy. Well, it's because Lucasfilm doesn't like her. While Rob McGregor was working on Dance of the Giants, Lucasfilm never stated that they had an issue with him confirming that Indy had been married before. However, after the book was released, Lucasfilm changed their minds and said the character had to go. So Deirdre was killed off in the next book, Indiana Jones and the Seven Veils.
Zombies.
Indiana Jones has faced off against a variety of enemies. However, his enemies are usually alive, not undead. But that doesn't mean that Indy hasn't fought zombies before. In fact, we know of 3 instances where he faced off against zombies. The most infamous one being in the book Indiana Jones and the Army of the Dead, released in September 2009 and written by Steve Perry. This is one of the most controversial stories in the entire series, because of 2 reasons. The first is that it deals with Indy fighting zombies, and the second is that the book spends a lot of time focused more on the villains of the story rather than Indy. Because of these issues, many people think that this story just doesn't really feel like an Indiana Jones story. What's interesting about the zombies featured in Army of the Dead is that there's actually 2 different kinds of zombies. The first is your traditional zombie, resurrected corpses that want to eat people. But also, Indy faces off against zombies who are still living people, but are being controlled by magic. Indy faces off against these zombies while looking for the Heart of Darkness with Mac in Haiti in 1943. Yeah, Mac from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has also fought zombies. Indy would also face off against zombies created by the Philosopher's Stone at the climax of Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix. Although, this fight wasn't very long, as the zombies disintegrated shortly after their creation due to the Philosopher's Stone being too powerful for the story's villain to use. The last story featuring Indiana Jones fighting zombies is a story that I'll talk about much later, because it's actually part of a cancelled comic that's apparently still canon despite it being cancelled. The original Staff of Kings. Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings is one of the weirdest video games ever made. Not because it's like super weird, but because its very existence is strange. Because it's a port of a cancelled video game. Announced in May of 2005, Staff of Kings was meant to be LucasArts' big new game on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but never actually saw a release on either of those systems. This is because Staff of Kings had a very rocky development, as not only were LucasArts having trouble with making the game's physics work, but also the story kept changing. The original idea for the game was that it was going to tie in with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. However, by the time of the game's release, pretty much all connections with Crystal Skull were cut. In 2007, the game was pretty much executed by LucasArts. It's a mean thing to say, but that's kinda what happened. Most of Staff of Kings' development team was moved over to Star Wars The Force Unleashed, and a new team was put into place, starting entirely from scratch. And to make matters worse, Uncharted 1 was released in 2007, and a lot of people working on the game became demotivated because they were worried that Staff of Kings wasn't going to be able to compete. LucasArts would then have some layoffs in 2008, which also heavily impacted Staff of Kings. And eventually, in January of 2009, it was officially announced that Staff of Kings was cancelled. At least the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions of the game. You see, while LucasArts was working on that version of the game, other studios like Article Minded Movement and Amaze Entertainment were working on ports of the game for the PlayStation 2, PSP, Nintendo Wii, and the Nintendo DS. And these versions of the game were released in June of 2009. Unfortunately, these versions of the game weren't well received, except for the Wii version. While the motion controls were panned, the game also came with the entirety of Fates of Atlantis to play, so most people actually just bought the Nintendo Wii version of Staff of Kings to play Fates of Atlantis. Staff of Kings audiobook. In preparation for Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings, Rob McGregor was hired to write the game's novel adaptation, and unlike the game, production on the novel went without issue, with the book being completed and planned to be released in June 2010. However, because the main versions of Staff of Kings was cancelled, the novel was cancelled as well. You would think that Del Rey, the publishing company, would still release the novel, as the game was still technically released. However, Del Rey felt that there weren't enough Indiana Jones fans to justify the release of the book. Luckily, Rob McGregor was still paid for his work on the novel. Years later, Rob McGregor attempted to release the novel himself as a free ebook and had Christian Goldiger create a cover for the novel. However, this release was rejected by the publishing company Bantam Books, presumably because of licensing issues. However, from 2021 to 2022, Rob McGregor was finally able to release the novel. Kinda. He produced an audiobook adaptation of the book via a podcast on SoundCloud. So after all of these years, the novel has finally, kinda, been released.
The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles will continue in a moment.
Indy, over here. Indiana Jones, at your service, Toad. Ah!
Indiana Jones and other action figures new from Raiders of the Lost Ark collection, each sold separately.
Watch him, Cairo, swordsman. Yeah, watch my swing. Yikes! Ugh. All downhill from here, swordsman. You'll be sorry, Jones. Tricked you again, Toad.
Indiana Jones, Tote, and Cairo Swordsman action figures, each sold separately from Raiders of the Lost Ark collection, new from Kenner.
Indiana the dog died twice. As revealed in the reference book, Indiana Jones and the Ultimate Guide, released in May of 2008, Indiana, the dog that Indiana Jones took his name from, passed away due to old age on April 5th, 1916. However, this wasn't the first time that Indiana has died. In Young Indiana Jones and the Secret City, released in June of 1990, it's mentioned that Indiana died saving Indy from a rattlesnake. This story is set in 1914, and is even backed up in the novel Young Indiana Jones and the Radioactive Ampule, with Henry Jones Sr. mentioning Indiana dying from a rattlesnake while protecting Indy. So you might be thinking that the information in the reference book was simply just an error. However, that's not entirely the case, as the reference book is probably referring to the fact that in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles episode, The Curse of the Jackal, Indiana is shown to be alive in 1916. So which is correct? Did Indiana die before 1916, or did he die in 1916? Well, I got a theory that's not true. Indiana the dog died saving Indy from a rattlesnake and was then cloned by Henry Jones Sr. to then die in 1916. The best part about this theory is that you can't prove me wrong. Alan Quatermain. Alan Quatermain is a ripoff character of Indiana Jones. Or at the very least, that's how a lot of people view him nowadays. In reality, Alan Quatermain is a character created in 1885 by H. Rider Haggard. He is an adventurer and big game hunter who travels the globe going on adventures in 18 different books. He's also very racist, and the books are, well, they haven't exactly aged very well in many parts. Alan Quatermain used to be well known in the 20th century, even starring in a few films in 1919, 1937, 1950, kinda 1959, and 1979. This led to him being a character in the comic series The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, created by Alan Moore. This would lead to the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen film in 2003, in which Sean Connery would play Alan Quatermain. And because of how bad this film was, Sean Connery would then retire from acting, which would lead to Sean Connery declining to make a cameo in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So, in a weird way, H. Rider Haggard is the reason why Henry Jones Sr. was killed off in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Anyways, you're probably wondering why I'm even talking about Alan Quatermain, as he predates Indiana Jones by almost a century. Well, I'm talking about him because he's kind of become a knockoff Indiana Jones character in the modern day. After the insane success of Raiders of the Lost Ark, film companies wanted a piece of that Indiana Jones money. However, they didn't have the rights to Indiana Jones. So instead, 2 films based on Alan Quatermain were released in 1985 and 1986, King Solomon's Mine and Alan Quatermain and the Lost City of Gold. And as you can probably tell by the second film's title, these films were made to bank off of the hype around Indiana Jones. A third film was even planned at one point, but was cancelled because Lost City of the Gold was a complete failure in both reception and box office return. Alan Quatermain in the Lost City of Gold has nothing on Dora in the Lost City of Gold, which, I'm not even joking when I say, is genuinely a pretty fun movie. Wasn't expecting to say that I'm a fan of the live-action Dora movie, but here we are. Anyways, outside of a 2004 TV miniseries adaptation of Alan Quatermain, the character was forgotten by the public until 2008, when the Asylum decided to make the film Alan Quatermain and the Temple of the Skulls, a very clear knockoff of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And after that, Alan Quatermain was forgotten again until 2023, when Alan Quatermain and the Spear of Destiny was released, which was obviously made to capitalize off of the success of Dial of Destiny? Anyways, because of these 4 films, many people nowadays just assume that the character Alan Quatermain is an Indiana Jones knockoff. Elsa lives in the Lego game. So Lego games are well known for sometimes altering the plots of a film in order to make a level playable with 2 players, or make a level a little bit more unique. For example, in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, the game has you play as Yoda and Captain Typho battling Palpatine, despite how in the film it's just Yoda. Quick tangent about this level, isn't it weird that Typho was the one chosen for this level? Like, right after this level, you play as Obi-Wan and Bail Organa going to Padme's apartment. And in the film, Typho sees Padme flying off to Mustafar, while Bail Organa is the one who saves Yoda after he's defeated by Palpatine. So, like, wouldn't it make more sense if Captain Typho and Bail Organa switched? Like, is that just me? Whatever, why am I talking about this in an Indiana Jones video? Anyways, in LEGO Indiana Jones 2, The Adventure Continues, there are a lot of changes to the source material, notably in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull sections of the game, like how a janitor teams up with Indy to battle the Soviets, and how Indy and Mutt battle a construction vehicle controlled by the Soviets on a train. But in my opinion, the weirdest change comes from The Last Crusade, where Elsa, one of the main antagonists of the film, lives, and actually gets redeemed, driving off with Indy, Henry Jones Sr., and Sala. Yeah, Marcus Brody isn't here for some reason. This is especially weird because story changes are usually done in levels. But this is the final cutscene of the Last Crusade section, so there's no reason for LEGO to change your fate. It's very weird. Unicorns are real. In Indiana Jones and the Unicorn's Legacy, released in September of 1992 and written by Rob McGregor, in 1928, Indiana Jones discovers a severed unicorn horn known as the alicorn. This severed unicorn horn was turned into a magical staff that allowed whoever was wielding it to have superhuman strength and the ability to summon the Unicorn's Gate, a portal that allows people to teleport. Upon discovering the horn, Indy thought that it was far too dangerous to be used by humanity, so he tried to bury it using TNT. However, it's revealed in Indiana Jones and the Interior World, released in December of 1992, that this somehow activated a portal connected to the Hollow Earth, which allowed a man named Malowa, who lived in the Hollow Earth, to obtain the alicorn. Indy was then tracked down by a princess from the Hollow Earth named Salandra, who demanded that he help stop Malowa. So Indy traveled to the Hollow Earth and confronted Malowa, who was planning on using the alicorn to team up with Mustache Man and the Axis powers to rule the surface world. This led to a fight, which led to Indy and Malowa being teleported to the top of the Statue of Liberty, which resulted in Indy destroying the alicorn and killing Malowa. Oh yeah, and shortly before this final confrontation, a bunch of unicorns showed up and defeated Malowa's soldiers. But I guess that's not as crazy as the Hollow Earth being canon to Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones and the Haunted House. After the success of Raiders of the Lost Ark, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg knew they wanted to make more Indiana Jones films. So they began to brainstorm some ideas. One of the ideas created by George Lucas was having Indiana Jones travel to a haunted castle, and the entire film would be a supernatural horror film with a tone similar to classic Universal horror films. However, this idea was never taken seriously by Steven Spielberg, who shot down the idea because he didn't want to make another horror film. Keep in mind, right after Raiders of the Lost Ark, Steven Spielberg directed Poltergeist, so he was a bit ghosted out. LucasArts and Spielberg Easter egg rooms. In Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, in the level The Ethereum, you could find a strange hole in the wall. If you approach the hole, you can actually enter it, and upon entering the hole, you'll enter a room modeled off of the video game series Monkey Island, also made by LucasArts. At least, most of them were. Not only is the room inspired by Monkey Island, but Indy is turned into Guybrush Threepwood, the protagonist of the Monkey Island series. You can also find various portraits on the wall of LucasArts developers, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and even Jar Jar Binks. This wasn't the only crazy Easter egg in the game, though. In the game's bonus level, Return to Peru, you'll find a bunch of switches. If you activate the switches in this order, 4, 5, 3, 1, 2, a door will open. Entering this door reveals a room inspired by the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, another Steven Spielberg film. In this room, you'll find a bunch of radios and a model of the mountain seen at the end of the film. Harrison Ford removed jokes about Indy being old. So Dial of Destiny was originally going to have a bunch of jokes about how Indiana Jones is an elderly man. However, after reading the script for the film, Harrison Ford requested that jokes about his age be removed from the film. He did this for two reasons. The first is that he felt that these jokes would distract the audience from the film's story. And secondly, he didn't want his age to be shown as a joke. Instead, he wanted to tell a story about a man who was near the end of his life. And if the film was filled with jokes about him being old, it would be tonally confused. Now, there are still a few jokes in the film, but they're usually about Indiana Jones being at odds with the modern world of 1969. There's not many, if any, jokes in the film taking shots at his age. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull injury. For once, Harrison Ford wasn't the one who got injured working on an Indiana Jones film. Instead, during the filming of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Shia LaBeouf pulled his rotator cuff when filming the sword fight sequence during the car chase. Like with Harrison Ford during the filming of Temple of Doom, Shia LaBeouf continued to work through his injury, which probably wasn't the best idea, because his injury became worse and worse throughout filming. Not only that, but he also pulled his groin during filming, so he was in a massive amount of pain throughout most of the filming process. Great Wall of China motorcycle chase. Originally, in Temple of Doom, there was supposed to be a sequence where Indiana Jones would get into a motorcycle chase across the Great Wall of China, being chased by Lao She and his henchmen. Now, this scene would have been shot on location, and this is why the sequence got cut. When Lucasfilm approached the Chinese government and requested permission to let them film a motorcycle chase on the Great Wall of China, the Chinese government refused. However, because Spielberg and Lucas liked the idea of beginning the film with a chase, the Shanghai sequence was created, and the motorcycle chase idea was reused for The Last Crusade. Shanghai in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Speaking of the Shanghai sequence, Indy was originally going to visit Shanghai in Raiders of the Lost Ark. An early version of Raiders' script saw Indy stealing a piece of the Staff of Ra from a Chinese warlord's treasure room. He would be caught in the act and would have to face off against two samurai. After killing one of the samurai with his pistol, the other samurai would slice Indy's pistol in half, resulting in Indy battling the warrior with his whip. Indy would eventually hang the samurai with his whip, only for him to be confronted by the warlord, who would shoot at him with a Thompson. Indy would dodge the machine gun fire by hiding behind a giant gong rolling on the ground. He then escapes with the headpiece to the Staff of Ra, before deciding that he now needs to go to Nepal. It's unknown why this sequence was scrapped, but the idea of having Indy in Shanghai would be reused in Temple of Doom. Helena Shaw movie. A few days prior to the release of Dial of Destiny, Kathleen Kennedy mentioned in an interview that a film centered around Helena Shaw could one day happen. Although, she also states that there were no conversations at Lucasfilm about this potential project. For some reason, a lot of people took this as confirmation that a Helena Shaw spin-off film was in development. and that she was replacing Indiana Jones. But that's not what Kathleen Kennedy said. As you can see, she said that a spin-off film could happen at one point, but it's not a project that's even in the discussion phase at Lucasfilm. It's very clear that this was just marketing talk for the film, and a lot of people just didn't read the article, instead just reading the headline. Cancelled Disney Plus series? In November 2022, it was reported that Disney and Lucasfilm were in development of a Disney Plus series set in the world of Indiana Jones. The series was stated to be set before Raiders of the Lost Ark, and rumors were being spread that the show would be about Abner Ravenwood prior to his meeting with Indiana Jones. However, it was then reported in March of 2023 that whatever this show was cancelled in favor of doing more Star Wars shows. This shift into just doing Star Wars projects was probably because of the failure that was the Willow Disney Plus series, which was another Lucasfilm production. And to this day, that's all we know about this cancelled show. Vampires. In the Young Indiana Jones episode, Transylvania, January 1918, during the final year of World War I, Indy is sent to Transylvania alongside some other soldiers in order to investigate Romanian General Matthias Targo. They're doing this because Targo had recently attacked an Austrian POW camp and abducted all of the prisoners. In response to this, the Allies had sent over some soldiers to investigate, but all of them were killed and had their body parts sent back to the Allies. Anyways, when they arrive to investigate Targo, one of their allies is killed, and Indy discovers that Targo is planning on creating a Romanian empire where he'll impale people with stakes, much like Vlad the Impaler. In fact, Targo is actually revealed to be Vlad the Impaler. Not only that, but Targo also has vampire fangs, implying that he's a vampire. Indiana Jones battles Targo, defeating him by dropping him off of a tall building. But this doesn't actually kill Targo, so Indy stabs a wooden stake through Targo's heart, resulting in his body igniting into flames, and a spooky image of Targo floats up before him. So, yeah, Targo was a vampire, and because he was also Vlad the Impaler, it's possible that he was actually Dracula, as the character of Dracula was inspired by stories of Vlad the Impaler, although perhaps Targo wasn't Dracula. As in the choose-your-own-adventure novel, Indiana Jones and the Cup of the Vampire, released in October of 1984, Indy straight up meets Dracula, and this story takes place long after World War I. Although, because this is a choose-your-own-adventure novel, it's probably not canon. The last thing about vampires that I'll mention in this video is the pen and paper RPG Indiana Jones and the Golden Vampires, released in January of 1995. This tells the story about how Indiana Jones faced off against a Chinese vampire living in Chinatown in San Francisco. But because this is a pen and paper RPG, its canonicity is questionable. Lao She and Cao Kahn were going to be in Indiana Jones 4. Lao She, played by Roy Chow, and Cao Kahn, played by Rick Young, were originally going to return in Indiana Jones 4. After the release of Temple of Doom, both actors had approached Steven Spielberg about reprising their roles, and Spielberg was actually pretty cool with the idea. So during the 1990s, when Indiana Jones 4 was being planned, there was always the intention of bringing back these two characters. Probably in a small role, but a role nonetheless. However, because Indiana Jones 4 kept getting delayed and reworked, the film wouldn't come out until 2008. And sadly, in April of 1999, Roy Chow passed away. Now, Rick Young is still alive, so Cao Kahn could have returned, but after the death of Roy Chow, Steven Spielberg decided against bringing back these characters. River Phoenix refused to play Indiana Jones on TV. So when the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles was announced, many people believed that River Phoenix, who played young Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, would be reprising the role for the show. And while that would make sense, this didn't actually happen. Lucasfilm did offer the role to River Phoenix, however, Phoenix shot down the request. Not because he wasn't interested in playing Indiana Jones again, but because he believed it wouldn't help his career. Unfortunately, nobody knows if this decision was the right call, as tragically, River Phoenix died on October 31st, 1993, due to a heroin and cocaine overdose. He was only 23 years old. Indiana Jones and the Monkey King. In the early 1980s, George Lucas came up with an idea for a second Indiana Jones film titled Indiana Jones and the Monkey King. This film would have seen Indy traveling to the Fountain of Youth, which is ruled by an army of monkeys and gorillas. However, this idea was dropped in favor of Temple of Doom. After the release of Temple of Doom, in 1985, Chris Columbus was brought on board to write a script for Indiana Jones 3. The two scripts that he wrote were inspired by both the Monkey King idea and the Haunted Castle idea I mentioned earlier. The first script took place in 1937 and began with Indy investigating a ghost sighting in Scotland. And after a crazy little adventure with a ghost, Indy returns to the United States, where Marcus Brody gives him a job in Africa. He's got a lead on the golden hooped rod of the Monkey King, Sun Wukong. So he sends Indy to Africa, where he meets up with a zoologist named Claire, and his old friend, Scraggy. And when he meets up with his allies, he discovers that he was followed. A teacher's assistant named Betsy had actually stalked her way to Africa in order to seduce Indy. Claire introduces Indy to a 200-year-old woman named Tiki, who knows where the hooped rod is. However, before they can actually arrive at the hooped rod's location, the group comes into conflict with some local pirates, but are eventually forced to team up with the pirates, as the German military has shown up, and they're led by a lieutenant named Mephisto and his cyborg second-in-command, and the Germans capture Tiki. So Indy and the gang and the pirates attack the Germans. And during this attack, Indy rides a rhinoceros while battling a German tank that's said to be 100 feet tall. Luckily, they're able to rescue Tiki and locate the hooped rod, which is located in the City of Gold, which is ruled by a bunch of immortal people and fully sentient gorillas. Upon reaching the city, Claire reveals that she has a superpower. She can summon a flock of birds at will. Indy then tells the people of the Golden City that they're about to be attacked by the German army. So Indy, the gorillas, the immortal people, and the pirates all team up to defend the city. This results in a big battle that ends with Indy dying. Yes, Indiana Jones dies, but he's resurrected almost instantly afterwards by the monkey god Sun Wukong. And after this, the pirates then betray Indy, but they all die, so whatever. Indy then takes the golden hooped rod and heads back to the United States. And the film ends. But like I said, that's just the first version of the script. Columbus wrote 2. The second version of the script is similar, but different in a few key areas. For instance, Sun Wukong is actually the bad guy, and makes Indy play chess with real people. He's also got a zombie army under his command. Oh, and that teacher's assistant, Betsy, she's not in this version of the film at all. So Indiana Jones and the Monkey King is probably the craziest cancelled Indiana Jones film ever. And this is why these scripts were rejected. Last thing that I'll mention here, remember that cyborg German Mephisto that I mentioned way earlier? Well, he was inspired by the cyborg in Indiana Jones and the Monkey King. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles Season 3. Despite being cancelled during its second season due to low ratings and the insanely high budget, George Lucas had various plans and scripts for a third season of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. We don't know all of the ideas for episodes, but we do know quite a few. Some of these include an episode where Indy would meet Belloc for the first time while investigating a crystal skull, an episode where Indy would meet Abner Ravenwood for the first time while in Jerusalem. Even more of Indy's time during World War I would be shown, like him being sent on a spy mission to recruit Anthony Fokker to the Allies, and an episode where he'd have to defend his friend who's being court-martialed. There was going to be an episode where Indy would fly across Australia with Harry Houdini, an episode where Indy would travel to Tokyo, Japan, and meet a young Emperor Hirohito, and General Nogi Marzuki, before getting attacked by a shark and having to be saved by a samurai. There was going to be an episode that was going to be inspired by the show The Little Rascals, in which a 5-year-old Indiana Jones is looking for William Kidd's treasure. There was going to be an episode where Indy and his friend Remy travel to the South Pacific and battle pirates. There was also going to be an episode where Indy was accidentally sent off to Argentina, where he would meet Carlos Gardel. There was also going to be an episode about Indy celebrating Christmas in Cuba, while also learning about racism. There was also going to be an episode where Indy would help make a movie in 1920. And finally, there was going to be an episode where Indy would use sled dogs in Alaska to save a bunch of people from dying of an illness. The original The Last Crusade. Jeffrey Boehm wrote 2 versions of The Last Crusade, which, while similar, were ultimately very different films. The first draft was set in 1939, and would begin with Indy retrieving an Aztec artifact in Mexico, and while doing so, would fight some dudes on a circus train. Instead of Walter Donovan being the film's main antagonist, it was actually Chasm, being renamed to Kamal. He's the one who shoots Henry Jones Sr. and dies by drinking the fake Holy Grail. Probably the weirdest change is that the Grail Knight would have battled Indy on horseback. Oh, and Vogel actually survives until the end of the film, where he's killed by a boulder when he tries to steal the Grail for himself. The second draft of the film is far more similar to the final film, but it does still have some key differences. For example, Walter Donovan, now named Walter Chandler, has Vogel's death, while Vogel dies at the end of the film, being beheaded by the blade trap. Kamal is once again the film's main antagonist, but this time, instead of drinking the false Grail, he tries to blow up the Grail Temple. So who gets the false Grail death? Well, it's Elsa, and she's also the one who shoots Henry Jones Sr. Meadow Mayhay's Indiana Jones 3. In January of 1986, Steven Spielberg hired Menno Meyjes to write the third Indiana Jones film. This film has never actually gotten a name, but I like to call it Indiana Jones and the Stairway to Heaven. The film is similar to The Last Crusade in that Henry Jones Sr. is introduced, the Holy Grail is the MacGuffin, and Sala returns. But that's where the similarities end. The film would open up with Indy battling some bad guys in Mexico for Montezuma's death mask, but it wouldn't just be humans that he would be fighting. He would also fight gorillas. After securing the death mask, Indy would meet up with a nun named Chantal, and the two would travel the globe looking for Indy's dad and the Holy Grail. They first traveled to France, then Venice, and would then travel to Istanbul by using the Orient Express. And there, the pair would have to disguise themselves as royalty. They would then travel to Petra, where they would meet up with Sala and Indy's daddy. Together, they would go and look for the Holy Grail before the Germans could find it. At the end of the film, Indy and Co. find the Holy Grail, and when Henry Jones Sr. touches the Holy Grail, a stairway to heaven appears, and Henry Jones Sr. then decides to climb up it. The nun, Chantal, wants to go as well, but she decides not to because she's in love with Indiana Jones. And that's how the film ends. Though that wouldn't be Meyjes' only script. About 2 months after handing in that script, he wrote another one. This time, the main villain of the film was a German woman named Greta von Grimm, and upon finding the Holy Grail, Indy would have to battle a literal demon. Indy actually kills the demon by stabbing it with a dagger with the phrase "God is King" written on it. While both of these scripts were rejected, Meyjes was still brought on board to co-write The Last Crusade story. Dragons. So it's not just vampires, zombies, and unicorns that are real in the Indiana Jones universe. So are dragons. In fact, Indy's gone up against a bunch of dragons before. In issue 19 of The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones, released in April of 1984, in 1936, Imperial Japan discovers a frozen dragon in Nepal. Turns out, this dragon is actually still alive, so Japan decides to thaw out the dragon and use it to attack the United States. Indy, who was sent to stop the Japanese from using the dragon as a weapon, gets into a scuffle with the creature and actually rides the dragon as it flies around the Himalayas. So how was Indiana Jones going to defeat this dragon? Well, he used a relic given to him by a bunch of people who worshipped the dragon. This relic had writing on it. And if read aloud near the dragon would teleport back into the ice. So Indy did just that. In Indiana Jones and the Interior World, the Hollow Earth story that I talked about earlier, in 1929, Indy was confronted by 2 different dragons while traveling through the Hollow Earth. And most famously, in Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, released in February of 2003, in 1935, the crime lord and Chinese army marshal, Kai Tai Chang, summoned a Chinese dragon using a relic called the Heart of the Dragon in order to kill Indiana Jones. Indy didn't actually defeat this dragon, however. Instead, he defeated Chang, and once he did that, the dragon turned on its master and ate him.
The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles will continue in a moment.
time to eat.
Infernal Machine multiplayer. Originally, Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine was going to have a multiplayer mode. It was going to be a traditional PvP-style multiplayer. While several multiplayer arenas were created, the multiplayer mode was scrapped during development, because apparently the game was just too complex. It was so complex that even testing the multiplayer was extremely difficult. A prototype of the game's multiplayer does exist in the game's source code. However, it's unplayable, so we don't really know too much about what this multiplayer mode would have actually looked like. Conan O'Brien in LEGO Indiana Jones 2. So a lot of people know about Conan O'Brien's joke promo appearance in Injustice. For those that don't know, he was added into a build of Injustice that was used to promote the game on his talk show. But it turns out, Injustice wasn't the first time this happened. In December of 2009, in promotion for LEGO Indiana Jones 2, The Adventure Continues, Traveler's Tale added Conan O'Brien to a cutscene in LEGO Indiana Jones 2. I'd show you the clip, but I can't, as this little promotional video is lost to media. The only thing we have is this screenshot from the video. Judging from the screenshot, it seems that this promo video was just a modified version of the Cairo swordsman scene from the game, with Conan O'Brien's model replacing Sala's. While not actually in this game, Conan O'Brien would make his actual debut in a LEGO game in LEGO Batman 3 for some weird reason. Tote was going to be a cyborg. So remember that cyborg guy Mephisto that I talked about earlier, and how he was inspired by the rejected film Indiana Jones and the Monkey King? Well, the cyborg from that script was actually inspired by plans for Raiders of the Lost Ark, in which Tote was going to be a cyborg. He was going to have a robotic arm that could turn into a machine gun and a flamethrower. Not only that, but he would also have a robotic Terminator-like eye. This may have been in the final film if it wasn't for George Lucas, who shot down the idea because he felt it was too outlandish for the film. Indiana Jones and the Lost World. Early on in the planning stages of Temple of Doom, George Lucas came up with the idea of setting the second film in a hidden valley filled with dinosaurs, inspired by the 1912 novel The Lost World, and the novel's 1925 film adaptation. This hidden valley would be located in China. In fact, the Great Wall of China motorcycle sequence that I talked about earlier actually came from this film pitch, before it was an idea thrown around for Temple of Doom. Sadly, we don't know anything else about this rejected film, other than the fact that, for whatever reason, Lucas and Spielberg decided against it. Indiana Jones Greatest Adventures Sega Genesis port. Released in October of 1994 for the SNES, Indiana Jones' Greatest Adventures is one of the most beloved Indiana Jones games of all time, as it's basically just a Super Star Wars game, but for Indiana Jones. While being an SNES exclusive, it wasn't supposed to be. A Sega Genesis port of the game was actually completed. It was even reviewed in a few gaming magazines like GamePro. However, despite being completed, this port was never released, as US Gold, the game's publisher, shut down in 1996. For almost 20 years, this port was locked away in an archive somewhere. Until, in 2015, a prototype build of the port was sold on eBay for $1,182. But sadly, outside of some short gameplay clips on YouTube, there's no way to experience this port, as despite it being sold, it's never been dumped online. Belloc was going to come back. According to Belloc's actor, Paul Freeman, Lucas and Spielberg had actually told him that they would call him about reprising his role as Belloc in the second Indiana Jones film. Although, this phone call never actually happened. So Belloc never returned. I gotta imagine that Lucas and Spielberg knew they wanted the film to be a prequel from the very beginning, because there's literally no way you could bring Belloc back from the dead. That dude is deader than dead. Dinosaurs are still around. That's right, it's not just unicorns, zombies, vampires, and dragons. Dinosaurs still roam the Indiana Jones universe. In Indiana Jones and the Interior World, yeah, this book is crazy, in 1929, Indy is attacked by a giant in the Hollow Earth, and is only saved from its wrath by a theropod dinosaur showing up and killing the giant. The dinosaur then tries to chase after Indy, but Indy's able to escape. But that wouldn't be the last time he would encounter a dinosaur. In the novel Indiana Jones and the Dinosaur Eggs, released in March of 1996, in 1933, Indy would travel to Mongolia after being shown a non-fossilized Triceratops horn that was discovered in the area. After arriving in Mongolia, he would eventually encounter a Triceratops, the very last Triceratops in the world. It's just chilling out in a secret tropical area in the Gobi Desert. While this is the last living dinosaur on the surface world, there's no reason to believe that the dinosaurs living in the Hollow Earth are extinct. M. Night Shyamalan's Indiana Jones film. In June of 2000, Spielberg and Harrison Ford contacted M. Night Shyamalan about potentially writing Indiana Jones 4. Shyamalan said yes to the offer and began work on the film treatment immediately. And that was the last time anyone ever heard about the project for 2 years. In an interview in August of 2002, Shyamalan revealed that while he did write a treatment for the film, Spielberg, George Lucas, and Harrison Ford weren't super big on his ideas. So he left the project. Interestingly, in 2008, M. Night Shyamalan said in an interview that he believed that elements of his film treatment were actually used in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Nobody really knows if this is true, however, as nobody else has ever commented on these claims. Indiana Jones and the Lost Treasures, Issue 7. I very briefly mentioned it earlier, but Indiana Jones and the Lost Treasures was a magazine in the UK in 2008. Each issue of the magazine had little puzzles, games, and even comics. The most notable thing about the magazine was that each issue came with a tiny treasure toy or statue. Some of these included a crystal skull, Ark of the Covenant, Olympic coins, a gladiator dagger, and an Anglo-Saxon battle helmet. The magazine was originally planned to run for 52 issues. However, due to low sales, the series was cancelled only after 6 issues. Despite being cancelled, the 7th issue of the magazine had some work done on it. At the end of the 6th and final issue, there was a tease for the 7th issue that revealed that it would have come with a false Holy Grail treasure, with it being advertised as, quote, make your own poison chalice, which is a crazy thing to say to a kid. Anyways, the teaser mentions that the issue was going to be heavily based on The Last Crusade, and it would feature a comic where Indy would discover a knight's tomb in France. And that's really all we know about it. It's unknown how much of the magazine was actually finished, although I assume that a lot of it was finished, seeing as these magazines were released bi-weekly and the magazine cover was finished. I should also mention that while we don't know how much was created for the 8th issue, we do know that it would have come with a collectible Aztec mask. Bedouins of the Sea. Okay, so there's like nothing known about this, but Indiana Jones and the Bedouins of the Sea is a cancelled French comic that would have been released in 1996. The only reason that we know this comic was even happening was because it was advertised on the back of the French comics Indiana Jones and the City of Lightning, and Indiana Jones and the Cursed Grimoire. The only other thing that we know about this comic is that it would have been written by Claude Moliterny, and would have been published by Bagheera. Some fans have theorized that this comic would have dealt with Indy attempting to discover more about the Sea Peoples, a mysterious group of people who attacked various groups in eastern Mediterranean regions in 1200 BC. But this is pure speculation. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was almost banned in Russia. Now you would think that Russia would love Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because, sure, the Soviets are the bad guys in the film, but the film also gave us Irina Spalko, who is pretty cool. But it turns out that some people in the Russian government didn't think that Kate Blanchett made up for the Soviets being the bad guys. And so, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation called for the Russian government to ban the film, with Communist Party member Viktor Perov saying, quote, "What galls is how together with America we defeated Hitler, and how we sympathized when bin Laden hit them. But they go ahead and scare kids with communists. These people have no shame." And Communist Party member Andrei Gindos saying, quote, "Harrison Ford and Kate Blanchett are second-rate actors, serving as the running dogs of the CIA. We need to deprive these people of the rights of entering the country." Spielberg responded to these calls for a Russian ban, saying that they had to make the Soviets the bad guys, since the film was set in 1957. In his own words, he said, quote, "The United States didn't have any other enemies at the time." But, like, that's just not true, Spielberg. Like, yeah, the Soviets were, like, the big ones, but, I mean, come on now. The US had some enemies in the late 50s. Regardless, the Russian government didn't end up banning the film. Illinois Jones. Okay, so this is just a rumor, but it's so damn funny I just had to include it. There's been rumors over the years that during the development of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, somebody from Lucasfilm approached Clint Eastwood with an offer to make a guest appearance in the show, where he would play Indiana Jones's older brother, Illinois Jones. And he was offered $10 million to do it. However, Clint Eastwood declined the offer, so we never got to see Illinois Jones. As much as I love this rumor, I don't actually believe it, because of two reasons. The first is that the rumor comes from Michael Munn, a biographer who's had their work called into question many times. And the second reason is that it just doesn't make any sense. Indy's parents didn't name him Indiana. His name is Henry Jones Jr. He took the name Indiana from the dog. If they did name him Indiana, then this rumor would be a lot more believable, as it would suggest that Indy's parents just really liked naming their kids after states. Shambhala Waterworks. Originally, Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine was going to be longer, with an additional level, titled Shambhala Waterworks. This would have been the game's 4th level, set between the Tian Shan River level and the Shambhala Sanctuary level. This level would have been about Indiana Jones traveling through icy caves and an ancient laboratory. Indy would have to do a puzzle where he would have to divert water into a water wheel in order to open a door. And upon opening the door, Indy would have to face off against an ice monster in a boss fight. GitHub user Ethereum1947 has actually made a rough map of what this level's layout would have looked like. So why was this level cut from the game? Well, nobody's really sure, but elements of the level would be used in the level Shambhala Sanctuary, so there are remnants of this level in the final game. The Dance of Death. Indiana Jones: The Dance of Death is a cancelled comic miniseries from Dark Horse Comics that was supposed to be released in 1993. However, for whatever reason, it just never got released. The story would have taken place in 1940, and would have been about Indy traveling to an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. There, he would come across a zombie outbreak rampaging throughout the island, caused by the 4th Horseman of the Apocalypse. Indy would actually battle the Horsemen and the zombies before escaping the island during an earthquake, which results in the death of the Horsemen and the end of the zombie virus. While this story was cancelled, it's actually still canon to the Indy timeline, as in the pen and paper RPG, The World of Indiana Jones, released in 1994, the events of the Dance of Death are directly mentioned in the timeline featured in the book. As to why the comic was cancelled, nobody knows. It's never actually been revealed. Belloc ate a fly. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, you can very briefly see a fly land on Belloc's mouth during the scene where Indy threatens to blow him up with a rocket launcher. The fly is then seen crawling around his mouth, and then it just disappears. This has led to many people assuming that Paul Freeman accidentally ate a fly while filming this scene. So, did Belloc eat a fly? Nope. The fly wasn't in the script. However, upon seeing it, it was decided to edit out the fly flying off Belloc's mouth, in order to make it look like Belloc had ate the fly. Indiana Jones Saves Mustache Man. Originally, Dial of Destiny had a very different ending. The original idea was that Voeller's plan to travel back in time to 1939 and kill Hitler and take over the Axis powers would have actually worked. And this would require Indiana Jones to save Hitler from being assassinated by Voeller in order to prevent history from being changed. While James Mangold liked the idea, he decided to scrap the idea in favor of Voeller's plan failing and Indy meeting Archimedes, as he believed that this ending had a much stronger emotional impact. Honestly, I'm glad that this was changed, because the idea of the final Indiana Jones film ending with Indy saving Mustache Man is, well, very weird, to put it lightly. Spear of Destiny video game. I mentioned it earlier, but Indiana Jones and the Spear of Destiny is a 4-issue-long comic miniseries releasing from April to July of 1995. This comic series was actually based on a cancelled Indiana Jones video game. The Spear of Destiny video game was briefly in development and would have served as a follow-up to Fates of Atlantis. The game was going to be the first ever LucasArts game to be produced by another company. However, LucasArts' plan with this other company fell through, canceling the game. Except, everything I've just told you might not actually be true. Spear of Destiny may have never been originally going to be a video game, as the only reference to this game ever being in development was from Hal Barwood, a former member of LucasArts. Many people believe that he simply got confused and mistakenly referred to the cancelled video game Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix as Spear of Destiny. However, in the interview where he actually mentions this game, he refers to the Spear of Destiny comic series, so he clearly knew that Spear of Destiny was different from Iron Phoenix. I don't know, what do you guys think about this entry? Do you think the Spear of Destiny video game was actually real, or do you think Hal Barwood just got confused? Indiana Jones and the Jungle Queen. Indiana Jones and the Jungle Queen is a cancelled Indiana Jones comic series that would have been published by Dark Horse Comics. It was supposed to serve as a spiritual successor to the Fates of Atlantis comic adaptation, and would have been drawn by Adam Hughes. Not much is known about the story, outside of it being about Indy and another adventurer named Emily Dreggs meeting the Jungle Queen. The villains of the story would be two dudes named Ambercrum and Devile, who were modeled off of Orson Welles and Joseph Cotten. As to why the comic was cancelled, I have no idea. Like I said, there is very little actually known about this story. The Big Snake. In Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, during the level Olmec Valley, Indy comes face to face with a giant feathery snake that's hinted at being Quetzalcoatl, an Aztec god. Not only was this snake monstrous in size, but it was able to spit snakes at people. And being a snake, it was also Indy's biggest fear, and he had to face off against it. And not only does he fight it, he actually kills it by tricking it into a spike, which results in this. So yeah, if this snake was actually an Aztec god, that means that Indiana Jones has killed a god. New Jersey Jones. Indiana Jones and the Sargasso Pirates is a 4-issue comic miniseries released from December of 1995 to March of 1996, and was written by Carl Kessel. It's about Indiana Jones battling some pirates in 1939, shortly after the beginning of World War II. He also comes into contact with the Kraken, but who cares about that? The craziest thing that happened to Indy on this adventure was meeting his long-lost older brother, New Jersey Jones. Yeah, he's not actually his brother. Turns out, New Jersey Jones was a con man trying to use Indy's name in order to con people out of money. They met after Indy was rescued from an iceberg, and immediately began claiming that they were brothers. But obviously, Indy didn't buy it. New Jersey Jones would then end up going on an adventure with Indy, Indy's latest love interest, and a crooked sea captain named Bill Lawton. During this adventure, they would get into a fight with some pirates. During this fight, Lawton and New Jersey Jones would actually betray the group. Lawton would die, but New Jersey would survive, and would apologize for his goofs. He survives the story and presumably stops pretending to be Indy's brother. Side note, turns out that Lawton guy was actually one of the dudes who fought Indy at the beginning of The Last Crusade. I know Star Wars loves its retcon cameos, but I didn't know that Indy did this as well. Cancelled Batman crossover? In 2009, Howard Chaykin was approached by Dark Horse Comics with a pretty interesting offer. They wanted to do a crossover between Indiana Jones and Batman. The comic would be a 4-issue miniseries set in 1939. The story would see Indiana Jones investigating reports of a bat monster haunting Gotham City. Upon arriving in Gotham City, he's able to quickly figure out that this monster is actually just Batman. And the two would eventually team up to battle some bad guys or something. And that's pretty much all we know about this comic. Chaykin said yes to the offer and began planning the story. But shortly after this, the project collapsed for various reasons. What were these reasons? Well, Howard Chaykin doesn't actually know. So, we don't know. If I had to speculate, it was probably something to do with licensing issues. Raiders of the Lost Ark injury. During the filming of Raiders of the Lost Ark, while filming the flying wing fight sequence, Harrison Ford mistimed a roll, which put him right underneath the plane's tires. Yeah, Harrison Ford's leg got run over by a plane, and it nearly shattered his knee. Luckily, he escaped this injury with just a tear in his left leg's ligament. He was only able to avoid having his knee shattered because of the film crew's quick work getting the plane to stop, and the rubber in the tire was much softer than usual. Due to the insane heat that they were filming in, Harrison Ford explained the situation in an interview, saying, quote, "I go down and start to roll away, and my foot slips right under the rolling plane's tire. Everybody was yelling, 'Stop, stop,' while the tire crawled up my leg. Luckily, the brakes worked. Inches before my knee was crushed, but I was pinned to the sand. I'm not normally a worrier. I know that they're not going to kill the main character in a $20 million film. I also know Indy wouldn't look good with a peg leg. I was a lot more careful about stunt work after that." Core Design's Tomb Raider clone Indiana Jones game. Tomb Raider 10th Anniversary Edition is a cancelled remake of the original Tomb Raider game from 1996 that was being developed by Core Design. Not to be confused with Tomb Raider Anniversary, released in June of 2007 and made by Crystal Dynamics. However, for a multitude of reasons, that game was cancelled in 2006. But instead of letting all of their work done on the game go to waste, Rebellion Developments, who had recently bought Core Design, had an idea. What if they make some edits to the game and use it to pitch an Indiana Jones or National Treasure video game? So, they did just that. The level Natla's Mines was the level edited the most, with Core Design adding some Axis Powers flags to make the level fit more with Indiana Jones. And so, they pitched the game to LucasArts, and LucasArts instantly rejected the pitch. This is probably due to two reasons. The first is that Staff of Kings was being worked on around this time, so they probably didn't want two major Indiana Jones games coming out around the same time. The second reason is because around this time, LucasArts actually hated Tomb Raider and had a grudge against core design. Why did they have an issue with core design? Well, it's because LucasArts believed that Tomb Raider was simply an Indiana Jones knockoff. Oh, and that National Treasure pitch? We don't really know what happened with it, but I assume that Disney rejected it, seeing as they don't really want to do anything with that IP. Everyone got dysentery while working on Raiders of the Lost Ark. So filming Raiders of the Lost Ark was absolute hell for most of the cast. At least the portions of the film that were filmed in Egypt. 150 members of the cast and crew got dysentery at the same time, because they had eaten some bad local food. One instance of this was when John Rhys Davies crapped his pants with diarrhea while filming the deleted scene where Salah is about to be executed. But the most famous example of dysentery on the set of Raiders of the Lost Ark was Harrison Ford. You see, the Cairo swordsman scene was supposed to be a full-on action sequence. However, because Harrison Ford couldn't go 10 minutes without literally crapping himself, they couldn't actually film the scene. So they decided to change the scene to Indy just shooting the swordsman. Funny enough, Steven Spielberg himself was one of the very few people to not get sick, as he had brought his own food and water from the United Kingdom. The 1991 Outpost Tour. In 1991, Jimmy Buffett went on a tour called the Outpost Tour, and during these concerts' intermissions, he would play a short 5-minute-long film titled Jimmy Buffett vs. the Evil of the Drawls. This short film is about Jimmy Buffett battling some dudes while flying a plane. It's not really that notable, except for one very strange scene. While being attacked by the forces of Drawl, disco, rap, and lip sync, Indiana Jones, played by Harrison Ford, emerges from the back of the plane and asks Jimmy Buffett if he needs help flying the plane. However, Jimmy turns down the offer, as he's seen how Indy flies planes. Indy then goes back to his seat, and that's it. This little cameo wouldn't be all that interesting if it wasn't for the fact that it's Harrison Ford. This and the Young Indiana Jones episode that I talked about way earlier are the only two times he has ever played Indiana Jones between the releases of The Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. As to why he's in the short, I assume it's because Harrison Ford was friends with Jimmy Buffett in real life. Karen Allen's very weird Marion backstory. So you think that Marion's backstory is weird? Well, it gets weirder. But this time, it's not because of George Lucas or Steven Spielberg. Instead, it's because of Karen Allen, Marion's actress. She said in interviews that during the development of Raiders of the Lost Ark, she came up with her own backstory for Marion, and it's very odd. According to her, Marion was a teenage... well, the word rhymes with institute and starts with the letter P. Yeah, according to her, after Abner Ravenwood died, Marion had to do some pretty bad stuff to survive. While this is never hinted at in the final film, it is mentioned in the film's original novelization. with Marion stating, quote, "He dragged me, a kid, halfway around the world on his crazy digs. Then he pops off. He didn't leave me a penny. Guess how I lived, Jones. I worked here. And I wasn't exactly a bartender, you understand? Should also mention this here. It's claimed that Karen Allen is the one who actually came up with the whole Indiana Jones dating a 15-year-old thing. However, I don't actually believe that. After all, we have direct evidence that Lucas and Spielberg wanted to write this into the film in 1978. Maybe Karen Allen was the one that decided on the age being 15, but Spielberg and Lucas were the ones that wanted Indy to date somebody who was underage. The really weird Temple of Doom prank. So you're probably not gonna believe me when I tell you this, but it's the truth. During the filming of Temple of Doom, the cast and crew decided to play a prank on Harrison Ford. What was this prank? Well, while filming the scene where Indy is being whipped before being forced to drink the blood of Kali, the person playing the dude who was doing the whipping left, and in his place, Barbara Streisand showed up in a leather BDSM outfit. She then began whipping Harrison Ford for starring in the films 10 from Nazarene and Hanover Street, since those films were box office bombs. And then she whips him for having a big paycheck with Return of the Jedi. But then, Carrie Fisher shows up and reenacts the scene from Return of the Jedi where Han is freed from carbonite. But then, Irvin Kershner, the director of The Empire Strikes Back, shows up and begins to critique Spielberg's directing. Honestly, I wouldn't believe that this was real, but there's actually a video of it. Yes, there is a video of this really weird prank. It's extremely low quality, but it proves that this did happen. It also shows that Harrison Ford jokingly asks Streisand to actually whip him, and then Barbara Streisand calls herself the F-slur. And that was the Indiana Jones Iceberg, ladies, gentlemen, and MPs out there. I hope you guys enjoyed that one. I know this is very late, usually for the past 2.5 years. Every month there's been a new iceberg, besides, like, the months where I've, like, previously announced I'm going to take a break. But, like, yeah, this was the first time I did not get one out on time. And there's a very good reason for that, and that is because I was burnt out. It turns out making feature-length videos for 2.5 years, it sometimes will burn you out. It will sometimes burn you out. Because every month it's these, which don't get me wrong, I like making them. I love making them. I love iceberg videos. I love the formats. It allows me to info dump my hyperfixations and stuff like that. I like that, but it's a lot of work. So, and after the X-Men Iceberg, which was like almost 4 hours long, I needed a little break. I needed a little time to just chill out. But yeah, it's out now, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was longer than I expected. I thought it was going to be like 2 hours on the dot, or 2 hours and 10, but no, it's 2:40. But what are you guys' thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Great Circle coming out, I think, later this year? It is 2024, they've said, but, like, it's already August, and they have not set a release date, so I don't know what's going on. What's your guys' ranking of the films? For me, from worst to best, it's Temple of Doom, Dial of Destiny, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then The Last Crusade. Yeah, I'm not a Temple of Doom guy. Putting aside the stuff that's questionable, I just think it's kind of annoying. I think Willie is annoying. I know she's I know the argument is, like, she's meant to be, but, like, okay, she's still annoying. And I don't really care about short rounds. I'm sorry. I don't really care. Not, like, saying his actor was horrible or anything like that. I mean, he's a kid. He was a kid. I think it's a little unfair to say, you know, he's annoying or whatever. He's bad because he was like, what, 10, 12 maybe, 14 at the max. I don't even think that's true. But yeah, that's my ranking of the films. It's the only one I don't like. Dial of Destiny, I think it's just kind of okay. I think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is extremely underrated. I think it's a ton of fun. It's flawed, obviously, but like it's a lot of fun. And then Raiders and especially Last Crusade are just like masterpieces. Next time I will be going back to a franchise I've covered multiple times before, but this time it's going to be the final time, and if it works out in the way I want it to, it will be the longest video I've ever made. So yeah, look forward to that, I guess. Then October, it's obviously gonna be like a spooky themed iceberg, and then there won't be one in November. I'm already gonna say this now. There will not be an iceberg in November. December will be the last iceberg of the year because I'm gonna need 2 months to work on that video. But yeah, that's it. That's all I got to say. Hope you guys enjoyed. Stay safe and all that, and I will see you all in the next video.
Choo choo, choo choo, ha ha.